Good evening, everyone, and I'm really sorry, apologize for the delay in starting this very important discussion. Um, and welcome to all of you for this discussion on India's deep state. Is any citizen safe? Over the last week, we have, I think, been astounded by the revelations of the Pegasus project, which is an investigation, as we all know, of forbidden stories and Amnesty International, comprising more than 80 journalists from 17 media organizations, on the use of the Pegasus spyware tool. The leak of all these more than 50,000 records of phone numbers revealed that the tool enabled remote surveillance of mobile phones of more than 180 journalists across the world, as well as of lawyers, elected representatives, human rights activists. We know today that the tool is sold by the Israeli based NSO group, ostensibly to gather intelligence on terror and crime. We know that the NSO clients are, according to its first transparency report, were select, approved, verified, and authorized states and state agencies, including Azerbaijan, Hungary, Bahrain, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, Togo, Rwanda, and of course Mexico, and of course India. Now, in India, we know that the tool was used not to combat terror or crime, but to conduct surveillance of well known journalists, of human rights activists, prominent dissenters, families of political prisoners, members of ruling BJP, and even of their household. The tool was used to monitor the life of a woman and her family after her complaint of sexual harassment against then Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi. Over the last decade, India has moved inexorably towards becoming a surveillance state. Aadhaar is all pervasive. Despite the hard fought recognition for the right to privacy, we still don't have a proper data protection law. In the name of national security, we have this vast and powerful, completely opaque network of official monitoring agencies. The process has accelerated with the NDA government. Armed with its legislation that sanctions monitoring, interception, blocking of electronic communication, and this brute majority in parliament that allows all these transgressions as well as so many others to go unchallenged. Despite the existence of this official surveillance superstructure, we have this deployment today of the spyware tool, deployment completely by stealth and subterfuge. So our questions on the extent of the surveillance, the monetary costs, the official agencies involved, all of these are going unanswered. In fact, our government's response to the Pegasus revelations is to say that these are an attempt to malign Indian democracy and its well-established institutions. Apart from all of this, of course, the attack on the right to freedom of expression, as well as the emotional cost of the extreme violation of privacy of those targeted for this surveillance is hardly discussed. It is in this context that the Network of Women in Media India, which is a powerful solidarity of women journalists across India, Sabrang India, which works tirelessly on issues of secularism and human rights, and the Free Speech Collective, which documents and campaigns on free speech expression, are hosting this discussion today. We are fortunate to have a very informed panel, all of whom have engaged with the issue of the day, as well as have worked at multiple levels to resist the erosion of our rights. We will begin today's discussion with M.K. Venu, the founder editor of The Wire. It's one of the news sites that is also among the 17 media partners in the Pegasus project. The Wire has been assiduously reporting on the project almost on a daily basis, even as its two founder editors, two of them, including Venu, have been targeted by this surveillance. In another context, Venu had said when he was asked, he said the government needs to explain the reasons for the surveillance. So I'd like to ask Venu to set the ball rolling. Do you have any expectation from the government that it will do so? What do you think is the extent of the surveillance? What is it that you all have uncovered so far? Over to you, Venu.
Thank you, Geeta. Uh, I'll just give a uh, brief account of how this began. Just about 3 minutes, then I'll come to your question of what we expect from the government and what has the government response been so far. Uh, Roughly, Geeta, how many minutes do I have so that I can pace myself accordingly?
I think 10 minutes would be good.
Yeah. 10 minutes is more than enough. Yeah,
Each of
yeah,
the speakers.
yeah. I'll try to finish much before that. Uh, so, Geeta, uh, the whole this whole episode, this whole investigation began with a very small, uh, uh, a small suspicion. I would say, of course, Forbidden Stories had got hold of this database, and Forbidden Stories, it's a non-profit French organization which promotes and supports investigative journalism, especially coming from authoritarian, polities and geographies, right? They, so so they are committed to a certain kind of, journalism, and uh, they had got hold of the NSO database of 50,000 people, names and telephone numbers, which, by the way, NSO hasn't denied. NSO has, in a legal communication to Forbidden Stories, which were given to all the media partners, including us. NSO has owned up the database, but it has tried to say that, well, many names are not meant for Pegasus. They are not Pegasus clients, in the sense they are not meant for Pegasus surveillance. They are meant for other purposes, but they have not explained what the other purposes are. So it's all mired in, still mired in a lot of mystery. Even as the Israeli government itself is embarrassed by what has happened so far, and it has ordered an inquiry. I'll come to that, but it began some 4 months ago with Forbidden Stories suspecting that mine and Siddharth's phones were infected with Pegasus. So they simply, at that time, there was no this whole arrangement about multi-country, 17-country investigation, media partnership hadn't happened. So they must have done their initial kind of due diligence, and they found that obvious kind of candidates. So they came to us, and both of us, through a reporter who had worked with the Forbidden Stories. So we agreed to test our phone, and that's how it began. The rest is history. Subsequently, of course, when we tested, for Pegasus, similarly in other countries where there are media partnerships, many others might also have tested positive. So that's how the process began. So after that, what Forbidden Stories did was, in collaboration with the Amnesty Technology Lab and also the Citizen Lab of Toronto University, a very, very credible organization which has done research on such spyware, Pegasus spyware, and their research has also been used by WhatsApp to file a case against NSO. If you remember, WhatsApp had also been Pegasus infected back in 2019. In fact, WhatsApp had given a list of 121 cases of such infections in India. Anyway, I'll come to that. So that's how it happened, and they gave names pertaining to India to us. Similarly, names pertaining to maybe France to Le Monde, UK to Guardian, etc. And they farmed out the names to different agencies, journalists, media organizations which they had chosen, and by and by it was a bit of a kind of a tedious exercise to call people, first to tell them that, shock them by saying that you are probably on the list of, and then asking them whether they would want to give their phone for testing. Pretty complicated exercise, but anyway, some people did. So far, like Prashant Kishore gave his phone fully infected, found to be fully tested to be fully infected. So far we have tested about 20 journalists, and we have 21 actually, and about 10 have been tested to be fully infected. As Snowden has said in one of his tweets, that a 50% strike rate, that amounts to a 50% strike rate in India in a small sample, right? So Snowden has said that's a significant strike rate, 50%. Obviously, because of the constraints of infrastructure and the constraints of not being able to convince people to give their phones, because there's a lot of fear associated, fear, stigma. Small businesses, they say that they're vulnerable. If their names are out, they won't be able to, their businesses will suffer. These are the things these are dimensions of privacy which we often forget, or people forget, state forgets. There are names of, for instance, simple small fund managers in Bombay. They say that if our names are out, people will stop coming to us. People will stop giving us, investing with us. So now, why were their names there? They are not associated with. Of course, we have. By the way, we have tried to respect people's privacy. Those who have told us that they are very vulnerable, and whose names have not been associated in the past with any investigation or wrongdoing, we are respecting their privacy. But we have told them that at any future date, they can shed their fear and come and give us their phones. So in that sense, I would say that this is a continuing investigation. This is not over. Now we have brought out in the last 1 week, we have brought out a number of names, people who have consented for their names to be made public, and there are bureaucrats, there are judges, media dominates, activists. Today, in fact, I must say, today we have a shocking list of army guys and a BSF Inspector General who was part of the integrated borders system management team. So you can imagine the sensitivity of that post. So his name is on the list. Of course, his phone has not been tested. So CBI director is there. So the names are out. So I won't go into the names. So what now? So I'm coming to that. So now there are two issues here. I find it very odd that the government is in a denial mode, right? Government is just saying two things: that we are not involved, we have not done it, and also that we have not bought Pegasus. Now, these two statements of the government, by making these two statements, the government has, in my view, has totally painted itself into a corner. I'll tell you why. Because we know from very, very 100% reliable sources from within the government, people who have retired and people who are serving in the intelligence establishment, that Pegasus has been bought. Right now, at some time or the other, if not now, maybe 6 months later, 1 year later, somebody is going to come out and say that yes, we bought Pegasus. And mind you, that is not Official Secrets Act. The fact that you bought Pegasus cannot be covered by Official Secrets Act, right? Because this government representative in Parliament, the IT minister, is on record that 40 countries have bought Pegasus, so buying Pegasus itself is not such a big issue. This is a statement by the minister. After making that statement, he refused to concede that India had bought it. So that is one aspect. Second aspect is, the people have asked this government. In fact, many editorials, in fact, Hindustan Times editorial has pointed out that if you are saying you have not done it, then all the more reason to investigate, because it could be Pegasus is sold to governments, vetted governments, as per NSO's own mandate. Yes. Suppose it has sold it to maybe some enemy state. If some enemy state is actually doing all this surveillance, it is even worse. It is a cyber attack by a foreign power, right? So for a government which prides itself on its national security plan, it becomes even more urgent for them to investigate. But government is totally silent on that. Number three, by and by, after withdrawing into a shell and after saying they know nothing about it, except that they have not done it, the government has kept quiet, has not said anything. But by and by, as more and more names are coming out, they are under pressure. But they are under more pressure because France has announced an inquiry, because now Hungary has announced an inquiry, Mexico has announced an inquiry, Israel itself, which is the originator of which sells Pegasus, has also announced an inquiry. Israeli government itself is somewhat embarrassed because the French Macron today the newspaper has reported that Macron personally called the Israeli Prime Minister and said, "What the hell is going on? We need to." So in my view, India does not at the moment. I think it's a global issue. It's an issue which concerns the integrity, of democratic institutions, not just India, around the world. I'm happy that this has become a worldwide issue, because I have no expectation of this Indian government, which has a brute majority in parliament, and it does exactly what it wants. It has virtually zero sensitivity to what
the anguish that people would go through.
Yeah, no. The problem with this government is it does not bother about what the opposition says or what the media says or what the judiciary might think, or what the legal community might think, or what the academic community might think, or what the activist civil society in general might think. I'll tell you what this government's response is. It's shocking, because they some of them have told me, when I asked them, some of the more moderate types, who also see that the dangers of what's going on. They say that our leadership is not bothered because this does not affect the the vast majority of the poor in the country. Now, this government has started seeing everything through the prism of the voter, the poor voter, that they think will continue voting for them. I think they are mistaken. So it's an illusion that.
So it's interesting that these even the fact that it seems to have been such a mind-sweeping exercise, it doesn't seem to be affecting them in any way. And
it doesn't seem to affect, because they are in this bubble. They're in this bubble that our voter and Modi's Prime Minister Modi's supporters have not gone anywhere. Anyway, that they will know when the UP elections happen.
I actually want to ask, bring, if you'd like to wind up, and then I can,
So I'll just in 2 minutes I'll wind up. So I'm saying that the only saving grace, as far as I'm concerned, is that global governments are now putting pressure on NSO and the Israeli government. Correct. Israeli government and the NSO are deeply linked. Israeli government gives an export license to the organization to export the Pegasus, and there should be global pressure, and our own human rights organizations, others, media organizations are actively networking with their global counterparts. The Reporters Sans Frontières is filing cases in several territories. I myself was in the press club day before. The Press Club of India passed a resolution saying that the media fraternity will seek a legal constitutional option. So we might also go to court. Others are also planning PILs. So I think the situation is quite dynamic, and this investigation will continue. People will keep coming forward to get their phones tested. So that's the stage that we are in. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Venu. I mean, this gives us a very, very good idea of what the reality is, what the extent of this is. I want to ask Mishi Choudhary to come in here, because I'm trying to understand whether this is just a situation with Pegasus or a much larger issue that we are facing with our government. And Mishi Choudhary is, of course, the legal director of Software Freedom Law Center. And thank you, Mishi, for joining us from New York. I hope it's not a manic Monday for you. But it would be good if you could speak a little bit also about, the work that you all have been doing, the cases that you all have been filing across the board. So it's a much larger issue that we are, faced with today. So Mishi, if you could. tell us something.
Thank you, Geeta. I hope you can all hear me fine. There is never a technical panel which just does not have technical glitches. Um, Thank you to Venu. He and his team have been doing the much required work of actually bringing to light what's going on. I will concentrate talking about what Software Freedom Law Center in India has been doing and what we have learned. I think to Venu's point to start with, worldwide, at least there are 500 private companies that operate largely unregulated, and they sell intrusive software to oppressive regimes that spy and harass their critics. I think how one sees oppressive regimes is obviously now a matter not decided based on whether they are electoral democracies or not. But there are at least 500 companies which have been doing so, and there is not much international regulation, which is export control compliance, that happens. Israel, obviously, NSO is based out of that, but it's not just the only Israeli company which sells it. And the government is responsible to issue those export control compliance licenses. Every government does that. United States does that. UK does that about technologies which have dual usages, which means that they can be used for civilian purposes, but for other purposes also. I think the details Venu has provided. What I will say is that I'm going to try to talk a little bit about what's going on in India. From my vantage point, India is witnessing a massive cyber attack against civilians. And civilians whose lives have been attacked are not just the prominent rights advocates, politicians, or journalists, but it's also an attack and a cyber attack on individuals who incarnate democracy and the rule of law. I think three important points which emerge are that these cyber attacks are coming from our own executive government. I think despite the denials, it's not the first time. We saw this in 2019 as well, and we have basically just seen evasive tactics, whether it is pretending to pass the buck to WhatsApp or just saying that there is a vulnerability in WhatsApp, that's the problem, or just coming and making the evasive kind of statements which the Minister of IT has currently made or the ex-minister has made. So the attack is coming from our own cyber government. The tools are part of international trade weapons, and our government permit, encourage, and funds that. And most importantly, under Indian law, this is somewhat legal. I won't say completely because there are sections which we would be able to talk about. Considering the extent of this kind of surveillance, there is at least some recourse in law because this is malicious software without anybody's permission installed on devices which have now become the life and blood of everything. On one hand, this government is telling us that all our life services should be online. You can't get a COVID vaccine without an app.
Absolutely.
You cannot get rations if you don't have your Aadhaar number. You can't operate your bank accounts, your income tax filings, everything in the name of Digital India. They've tried to put online. Yet, India is also the country with the highest number of internet shutdowns in the world, which means that they can bring your life to its knees, economic, political, and social life, with just one kill switch. It's also the same government which once tells you, okay, do everything.
Yeah, we seem to have
Lost a connection, huh?
lost a connection. Ask Mishi to come back after Apar and Mihir. I'd like to invite Mihir. Mihir, are you there? Because you have muted yourself. Yeah, Mihir. Could you tell us, like Mishi was already talking to us about how bad the situation is in a larger sense, but how does it actually affect people who are like some of the accused in the Bhima Koregaon case, who have also had this kind of hacking done to their computer devices and other things. Mihir Desai, for all of you, has been fighting these cases He's a senior counsel in the Bombay High Court, and he's also a very, very well known civil liberties activist. So, Mihir.
Thanks, Geeta. Thanks, Free Speech Collective, Sabrang and Women in Media for hosting this. Just very briefly, as you know, when we talk about surveillance, and we are right now talking about not just surveillance, we are going beyond surveillance. We are talking about, you're talking about surveillance, you are talking about data mining, you are talking about planting evidence. These are the three things. One, Pegasus, of course, we talk about surveillance and data mining. But like we saw in the Bhima Koregaon case, it also reached the stage of planting of evidence. So what is happening now is, if you look historically, for instance, the surveillance networks or surveillance of people, which is obviously always going on historically, but initially when there were no telephones, there were no computers, there were no smartphones or any kind of phones, you had surveillance which is essentially physical surveillance of individuals, by following them, going to their house, talking to friends, stalking them, etc., etc. That was a kind of surveillance which used to go on. And then you had telegraph system started, and the first law which came was way back in 1890s. The Indian Telegraph Act, which permitted the central government and the state governments to intercept in certain cases of public emergency and public safety kind of things. After that, of course, after the Constitution, there was all a debate. There was always a debate about whether right to privacy is a fundamental right, not a fundamental right, etc., etc. And various, all kinds of judgments came in. Initially, saying that domiciliary visits are not legal, not constitutional. At the same time, stalking a person is constitutional because you are not interfering with his day-to-day work. Talking to that person's friend is legal because you're not interfering with that person's daily life. That was those kind of judgments came from Supreme Court, and finally it led to this. Initially it led to the PUCL judgment in 96, I believe, where there were directions issued as to how and under what conditions you can tap the telephones of people. So telephone tapping was allowed under the Indian Telegraph Act, but there were certain conditions put under by the judgment, and now that has been through the rules. After that, you have the Information Technology Act of 2000, and which also provides, as it was mentioned earlier, which also provides for certain kinds of restrictions on interceptions, on data mining, etc., etc. Various kinds of restrictions provided. And then you have the famous privacy judgment. Because ultimately, surveillance, the challenge to surveillance of any kind, is essentially on the basis of right to privacy. And you have a fundamental right to privacy determined only now in the last decade, where again the Supreme Court very categorically talks about three kinds of privacy arguments. One is the bodily integrity. Second is, of course, informational autonomy, which is very important.
Yeah.
And third is individual decision making. So, in light of this, of course, a lot of laws might be challenged, and a lot of laws might be might come up for challenges in court. But what is important, I think, what is most important right now is that in the present government, in the last 6, 7, 8 years, especially, not that it wasn't happening earlier, but more so in the last 6, 7, 8 years, the surveillance of all kinds, illegal surveillance, completely illegal. Though the law provides that certain kind of situations you can do surveillance, law does not allow data mining. Law does not allow planting of evidence.
Yeah.
Now that has happened in Bhima Koregaon case. What happened? Bhima Koregaon case, people's computers were hacked through a malware, and actual documents were planted. And those planted documents are the only documents shown as evidence against these people who are in jail for 3 years. That is what has happened right now, in Bhima Koregaon case. So similarly, And then we had to approach Arsenal, which is a famous organization in New York. Ask them to go through the data, find out whether there is any malware. They found out that there was malware, and they also came to the conclusion that this malware could have been easily detected if the Indian forensic laboratory had made an attempt. But obviously, they did not make any attempt. And the malware was then we found the malware, and we have now produced it in the High Court, and the case has started today only about whether Arsenal's report and what kind of weightage to be given to it. So that has started today. So the point which I am trying to say is that now we are get a Pegasus, NetWire, etc., etc. These are the various kinds of malwares. Now the situation is becoming so drastic that nobody knows whether their phones are hacked or not. I don't know whether on my computer something is planted or not. Okay. And the planting happens, especially in Bhima Koregaon, it happened over a period of 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. So it's a very systematic plan. It's not a mistake committed by someone or somebody playing a mischief of trying to putting some virus into your computer. It's not that. It's much more than that. It's surveillance at a much higher level, much pronounced manner that they are doing surveillance now, and that is something which becomes very shocking, because telephones used to be tapped even earlier, but that's real-time tapping, real-time finding out what the person is talking to the other person. Then you come to data mining, which is even worse, in the sense that you actually find out all the data from the person's computer, all the data from that person's phone, and then planting of evidence. So I think we are in for really bad times, and the law which is there today, like you have a data protection bill, which is anyway a very weak bill, which is pending in the parliament. It is not moved. You have Evidence Act, Indian Evidence Act, which hasn't moved adequately with the changing technology. So how do you prove that a particular electronic document is valid, not valid? Is something which everybody is fishing in the dark. That's the kind of situation we are in. And people like Sai Baba, who was convicted and who is serving a life sentence, was convicted essentially on the basis of certain material found on his computer, and nobody know. And the Indian, neither the Indian Evidence Act nor the Information Technology Act are adequate to deal with this kind of situation.
Absolutely.
That's the problem, That's what I basically wanted to say.
Absolutely. I think that's really important, Mihir, because these people are spending years in prison, and initially it seemed very far-fetched. It seemed like it was impossible to have, anything planted. But we now know, of course, that technology allows for a lot of this kind of fabrication. I want
Mishi is back.
ask
Mishi is back.
Mishi, yeah, I want to ask Mishi if she could complete her points and what she wanted to say. So, Mishi, glad to have you back again. So, could you just...
Thank you, Geeta. So sorry about that. I was just trying to paint a larger picture that whether the government denies or does not deny about Pegasus, we know that mobile operating systems are not secure, and the combination of surveillance capitalism aided by the companies ensures that some kind of malicious surveillance, whether couched in legal terms or not, will happen. The second major point I want to say is we are perhaps the largest or the only democracy which does not have any judicial oversight or parliamentary oversight on surveillance that's carried out. Now, we have the PUCL judgment. We have some guidelines which form whether it is the Telegraph Act or the Information Technology Act, which are also based on the same old guidelines. I would really like to know who are the people who actually spend all their lives on those rotary or perhaps the landlines for which those phones were made. So the anachronistic nature of that is pretty evident here. And everything which under the IT Act comes out are based on that exactly. 2014, Software Freedom Law Center India also filed a right to information application in which we were told only under the central government, 7,500 to 9,000 phones are tapped every month. Now, this is only central government, not the state governments, mind you. Now tell me, if there are 9,000 phones, this is 2014, very old data. After that, they've decided not to give any information at all. But that also means that, and the oversight is provided by the executive itself. It's like I can check my own examination papers. What am I going to do? I mean, if I understand how the grading system works, I will give an A+ and continue for that. And considering just the larger numbers, is that the only job at that level of a public servant for them to have, that, okay, they will just keep reviewing that? That's just one part of it. The second aspect I want to say is that there is not just this, but continuous steps being made to create a surveillance structure to which neither the judiciary nor the parliament, nobody else has an oversight. In March of 2020, we learned from the parliament, the government admitting that they had used artificial intelligence and facial recognition software to identify 1,100 protesters who were coming. World over, moratoriums are being now imposed. The governments themselves are deciding, companies are deciding, whether it is IBM or Microsoft, that facial recognition software is very, very, it's full, it's like mines of something. It's very dangerous, so we should not be doing it. India is marching full speed on without ever thinking about it. The third thing which I'm going to say also is that there are 3 surveillance projects started under the UPA, and that is why a political party who is in power doesn't matter, because the desire to control is universal. In 2013, when call data records of Mr. Jaitley were made available, and compared to what spying on a phone is, call data records are like, now seem like a small bear, I would say. And that time, of course, left the right to be left alone, and the way Mr. Jaitley wanted, we all want that version of privacy. But so, and what I was going to say is that it doesn't matter which party is in power, the desire to control is universal. They started Central Monitoring System, NETRA and NatGrid. These are collectively and separately seeking to spy on the communication of citizens in India. Under these surveillance projects, the internet traffic of every citizen is subjected to interception and surveillance by the government. Now, all of these, now CMS is similar to the PRISM project, which Edward Snowden had exposed. NatGrid has been built with an intent to enable the government agency to get information from banks, which is bank account details, transaction details, etc. And of course, then there is NatGrid. Now, that time when they started, that time we didn't have the Swamy judgment. It didn't say that least intrusive methods have to be used, even when you say that there is perhaps a requirement by the state to surveil. And it doesn't actually allow for mass surveillance. So that's why the difference between wholesale or retail surveillance. Are you going to scoop everybody today? And the default is that all of us need to be chilled, like Venu started to say, I do not know. And Mr. Desai also said that, I do not know whether my phone is being tapped or not. Now, important point here is that whether in the parliament when questions are asked or the right to information, no information is available at all. We have filed a case in the Delhi High Court challenging these surveillance methods, as well as Pegasus when 2019 it came. The case is moving at the snail speed you can imagine it is. In 2019, when this happened, we wrote to the Standing Committee of IT, Mr. Tharoor heads it, again, saying, so this has happened. We would like you to speak to the civil society organizations, to the people who've been victimized. That time, 121 names came. Some things happened. They did speak to some of the victims, but where is that report? We are back again in the same thing. So I'm going to conclude and let others talk about it. The last point is that when MeitY has come up with breaking of encryption, which is the originality and traceability requirement, as it tries to control the OTT platforms plus online news organizations, we can see how the control of free speech, free flow of information, as well as surveillance. These are all parts or somehow interlinked parts of what is the system we are moving towards right now. And nobody should be taking this lightly, because it endangers the society as a whole, not just all the prominent individuals whose names have come out. And we should not underestimate the seriousness of the threat And that's why different strategies need to be used at judiciary, at parliament, and even the legal strategy for different victims is going to look very different based on whether it will be a criminal investigation or certain will be involved or constitutional challenges will come in.
I think, yeah, thank you, Mishi. I don't think we even got to the stage of how we are going to combat this. We are still grappling with all the various aspects of this entire surveillance project. And thank you for bringing in the larger picture, because it is, of course, much bigger than one project that we are seeing today. I'd like to move to Apar. If you could tell us, Apar, what you see as the way this is unfolding and where you think this will go, especially with the work that you all have done with Internet Freedom Project, the Internet Freedom Foundation, and a lot of issues that you all have been tackling. So if you could tell us.
Thank you so much, Geeta. I would like to thank the Free Speech Collective, the Network for Women in Media, for organizing this conversation. And as a person who's going last in this order, I think I'll add value specifically by avoiding repetition, but also looking at a bit of the details with respect to Pegasus and the filing in the California court, as was just hinted initially by Mr. Venu. I think it gives a high degree of insight into the software. What is Pegasus? Secondly, how does it contract with state parties? And I hope that also informs us what may be a similar contract which may have been entered by the government of India, most possibly was entered by the government of India. So just to start out, in terms of what Citizen Lab itself states about Pegasus, is to understand that while the primary justification by NSO Group for Pegasus, which is the company based in Israel, is the justification that it is used to aid in legitimate criminal cases, which have a very high threshold of being either cases of terrorism or national security impacting public order. Contrary to that, Citizen Lab's own findings are, quote, we have found indications of possible political themes within targeted materials in several countries. And this is on the basis of revelations first made in 2019. Hence, when assertions are being made today and factual disclosure are being made today, they are essentially representing an attack on the very basis of the political establishment of India as a republic, which includes principal members of opposition, the chief electoral commissioner, as well as possibly a Supreme Court judge. When you control these levers of power, you indirectly also control the very process of democratic institutions, which are seeing a larger erosion. Now, in terms of the claims by Pegasus itself, by NSO Group itself, it does not stand to muster, because in 2019, when the first tranche of disclosures are made through first reporting by the Financial Times, which was subsequently substantiated within the Indian Express, several activists who then subsequently deposed before the standing committee were notified by WhatsApp that their phones were intercepted. Secondly, these activists subsequent to that also came forward in the press. Some of them were publicly identified. And at that point in time as well, firstly, in October, towards the end, the then Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad did not provide any clear answer. In fact, stated that a notice had been sent to WhatsApp itself. Secondly, on the floor of Parliament, stated that all procedures which are followed as per our interception laws are legal, and if anybody has any complaints, they can go and file a complaint registering a criminal case. Now, let us understand why this is not mere interception by itself. And this comes through in the user manual of Pegasus, which is attached as an annexure to the complaint filed by WhatsApp subsequently in November. So I just like to share my screen for a second. Okay. And there it goes. Is it coming up fine? Geeta, I hope it is coming up fine. You can see a blue kind of PDF document right here.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, we can see.
Thank you. We can see it.
Okay, so this is the Pegasus product description. Okay, and this is there as an exhibit in the California case. I'll quickly switch to the part where it introduces itself and what are the capabilities itself within this system. So if you see what are the benefits of Pegasus, and these are the actual operational functionalities within the software. Unlimited access to target mobile devices, intercept calls, bridge intelligence gaps, handle encrypted content in devices, application monitoring, pinpoint targets. This goes far above what was conventionally understood to be tapping or intercepting or listening into a conversation. You're actively querying information from the phone itself. Now, let's also look at one other document which is annexed to this legal filing, which is the contract between NSO Group and the government of Ghana. Now, if you look at this agreement, which has been entered, firstly, this agreement has a consideration of $8 million, which is contained within the annexure itself, which also gives rise to a very high amount of money, which is placed in terms of deployment of the system. And it's with a sovereign entity. The second thing which I would like to indicate is that if you look at the description of the system and services, it does not only require a software which is downloaded and installed. It's a very complex software, which in fact also requires deployment, training, hardware installation. By itself cannot be done without actual physical presence of contracted personnel, given the amount of money, the sophistication of the software. Beyond this, I would just like to quickly now go to what has been subsequent to this legal filing and what's the context in this. The context before the California court is WhatsApp's claim that there has been unauthorized access to its systems, which has undermined it, and they have proceeded claims under tort, but also under the Computer Fraud Abuse Act and the California Computer Fraud and Abuse Act and the Data Act additionally. But there's also been a subsequent filing which has been made by seven international digital rights organizations as well as local ones. It also includes the Internet Freedom Foundation. And this filing is an amici brief intended towards also bringing the testimony of the actual victims who have suffered this kind of invasion, which includes Bela Bhatia from Chhattisgarh. And if you just go towards the end of what she narrates in this filing, it is essentially this. For Bela, this type of harassment is expected, and so is surveillance. Bela has also assumed that her phone was tapped and her movements were tracked long before the 2019 Pegasus attack. So when Citizen Lab informed her that she had been targeted, she viewed it as a continuation of years-long surveillance campaign by the Indian government in a more sophisticated package. This could not understate the implications, the impact the surveillance has had on Bela's life. She now operates from a baseline of suspicion and restricts her activities. And it is essentially what is the core question in the conversation today. Is this an attack on people much more broadly and activists? And yes, people who have been subjected to this malware attack, not a mere passive form of interception, have sensed that attack. To finally just wrap this up, I'd like to indicate certain documents on state responsibility, which comes through precisely the understanding of Israeli law. And this is on the basis of a legal opinion which was given to the company which was investing in NSO Group at one point in time. And this is a group of private equity investors. They obtained a legal opinion from a law firm to ensure that the activities of NSO Group with regard to Pegasus are legal under Israeli law. And essentially what they have been told is as follows, and as being reported by the press fairly frequently. So if you look at this opinion, it essentially states in paragraphs 8, 9, and 10, the legal regime in Israel with respect to export of these weapons. It also ties in with the agreement which I showed with the government of Ghana earlier. And all of this quite simply states it's a cyber weapon. Pegasus has the capability of going beyond passive interception into a much more active form of malware infection, hence is actually classified as a cyber weapon, requiring certain clearances by the Israeli Ministry of Defense comparable to an arms export. Now, where does that legally stand? I think so. Some comment has already been made with respect to this on India's lack of proper, firstly, statutory recognition and oversight of intelligence agencies. Secondly, our antiquated system of even existing safeguards with regard to interception, which are within the Telegraph Act as well as in the Information Technology Act. At present, there are also challenges in the Supreme Court after the MHA notification, which authorized certain agencies, both by IFF as well as the UCL, to improve these standards. I'll be pasting links of these various documents I've referred here, and I hope that helps further our understanding with respect to them. Thank you so much, Geeta.
Thank you so much, Apart. That was really interesting, and I think to some extent we all feel a little more informed about something that really seems like such a black hole. I must say that we have a number of questions in the chat box, and we have many more questions coming in. This discussion is also being live streamed on Sabrang India, as well as on Radio Nomad. It's a radio show. It's a radio. We have about 200 listeners in this radio stream. So there's obviously a lot of interest in this, and I hope that this will spark much more discussion, much more empowered information, at least from all of us, on how we're going to be dealing with what our panelists have already told us is a very, very major intrusive attack on our very freedoms, every single one of them. It's not really just about surveillance, it's about all our rights, it's about our digital selves, and we really have to get back to resisting and pushing back. First of all, of course, getting our government to be more accountable to us. I will hand it over now to Teesta, who will handle the questions, and we have a lot of them. Thank you again, and Apar, Mishi, Mihir, Mr. Venu, all of you, please wait on for all the questions that are coming in. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Geeta. It's been an amazing session, and I just wanted to mention one more factual thing before I get on to the questions, because people are obviously thirsting for information. Mishi mentioned the absence of parliamentary or judicial oversight, which makes it far more dangerous in our country. In 2011, we had the Intelligence Services Powers and Regulation Bill, which was tabled in Parliament. But of course, predictably, it was never passed. So that's another document that we need to look at and go back to, because if there's no sort of legislative, it's not just a data protection bill, we had an Intelligence Services Powers and Regulation Bill. The first question that I'll just read out is that the list available perhaps consists of those, we are looking at Pegasus now and the people who've been targeted, that the list available perhaps consists of those, and I think this goes to Venu, of those who are actually hacked and those who are potentially targets. The number of those in India confirmed hacked is around 10, is that right? And the confirmation calls for forensic testing of the listed devices. It would be nice if that point is clarified. Venu.
Yeah, so it's true that the number of the total 300 phones were verified in the sense that we were able to contact them, and as I said, the process of with the process of verification and the process of persuading people to come forward and test their phones is still on. So this is an ongoing story. It's one larger point I want to make, because there is we are very firm that citizens now need to. I myself, as I said 4 months ago, when I was asked to test my phone, I was hesitant, and I experienced my own thought process. How then later I gave in and I said yes, I think there's a larger public interest involved. So I think more and more people need to come forward and get their phones tested. And we have also I spoke to some representatives of Apple, and I asked them, your Apple's iPhone's biggest, they spend billions of dollars a year on their simple branding of their privacy and security as their main selling point. And I said, this Pegasus has smashed your very branding, proposition. So Apple kind of admitted, a very senior Apple guy admitted that this is a problem. And I have a feeling like WhatsApp, Apple is also going to, it issued a statement saying that this is wrong, what has been the Pegasus attack on human rights, activists, journalists, etc., etc. I'm trying to sort of tell people, these technology companies, that they should now make testing facilities as part of their larger, business proposition, accessible to ordinary people. Like at the moment, Tista, we having to send phones or the image of the phones to Paris, Amnesty Lab technology. Why can't we have these labs in India so that every citizen has a right to go and, just as you get yourself virus tested for corona, one should be able to go to the nearest lab and, real-time test one's phone, whether it's... So that is at the civil society level. I think we should campaign for that. At the moment, we've only tested 10 out of 20, as I said, 20 out of 20 phones that we've got for testing. We've got 10 have tested Pegasus positive. So it's a 50% strike rate, which I think is quite significant. But the others are also, many have said that they don't want to, but some have, I can tell you that some are in the process of changing their mind. This includes prominent opposition leaders also. Initially, they said no, but now they, in fact, we are telling even the BJP government, the IT minister must come forward and give his phone, the Ashwini Vaishnav or Prahlad Patel or whoever. It should be across the board, So I think that process is still on. It's let's see how it pans out, but that awareness needs to be built up.
Yeah, related to that, there's one question which I want to add. You mentioned Apple, which is why I'm bringing it in, that apparently it's extremely difficult to test the smartphone for this. That's what I've been told. Now, if that is the case, a vast majority of users are smartphone users.
What our experience is, Tista? This Apple iPhones are easier to test in the Amnesty Lab in our experience. Some of the Androids are probably because they are a little older or less sophisticated technologies. They are more difficult to in fact even penetrate by Pegasus. That's the impression that we are getting at the moment. Pegasus finds it very easier to actually enter iPhones. So I think the way the malware is designed. So we are told that some people are telling you that you may want to go back to Chinese phones because the Chinese have their own internal systems to counter Pegasus. By the way, China, Russia, and US, they have very sophisticated technologies which can counter Pegasus and destroy it the moment it enters their system. It's only the other countries. I mean, I'm sorry that India is in that company, which are buying this Pegasus and using it on their citizens. It is not allowed in the US. It's not allowed in the. Of course, US has its own sophisticated systems to do surveillance. They do it, but they are in control, at least of not letting Pegasus come from some other land or some private party catching hold of Pegasus and trying to sort of surveil.
In terms of the denial there's one more question for you, Venu, is that in terms of the denial by governments, that's in the Indian government vis-a-vis the Wire and the Forbidden Stories and the entire Pegasus expose, what forms have the denial taken? Specifically, if you can, one of our participants wants to know that specifically the denials which have been shifty, what are those denials?
So the first denial by the Indian government, so far other governments do not deny that Pegasus exists and the fact that this database exists, which is why Macron has written to the Israeli government asking questions, right? And others have set up inquiry. Even Israeli government, even NSO had issued a statement 3 days ago saying that they are aware that Pegasus is open to abuse. So therefore, the world is asking for an investigation to abuse. Indian government is denying everything. Indian government is denying that they have Pegasus. Indian government is denying that such a database exists although NSO has considered that a database exists, Indian government has been saying through their Godi channels, media channels, that this potential targets means nothing. Where is the actual confirmed test of mobile phones for Pegasus? Now, the answer to that is what Snowden tweeted. If out of 20, you can only do a sample survey, right? Out of 20, 10 have tested positive. That's a 50% strike rate. It's a bit like saying that when you are, 800 million voters in India, if you're doing an election survey, you should talk to all 800 million. After all, most sample surveys are done on 10, 15,000 or 20,000, right? So that is my answer to I mean, it's a statistics is a science, sampling is a science, right? So this government is refusing to recognize the benefit of sampling, or even the existence of sampling, statistical sampling as a science, So that they're denying, and of course they're saying that this is all fake news. All that is coming in has come in 17 media in 17 countries. It's all based on a fake database. The other denial, of course, which is Pegasus's denial, but the Indian government has not. NSO's denial. Indian government has not said anything so far. They are saying in the legal communication to forbidden stories, they are saying that the entire database is not. It's not Pegasus surveillance request related. Many of the numbers, many of the names on the database of different countries relate to other purposes. The services relating to other purposes, but they don't define what the other purposes are. Now, I can't see what Indian judges or constitutional experts or election commissioners or politicians or activists, journalists could be, their names should be there on the database for what other purpose, I don't know. I mean, it's not about selling toothpaste or soap,
Thanks. Mishi, this question is for you, that you mentioned that there are 500 companies all over the world who are kind of manufacturing this kind of very invasive malware. Will it ever end is the question. And is there any way to block such software completely?
So I will say, I'll answer the second question first. First thing is that mobile operating systems are inherently insecure. Apple has definitely invested quite a lot, and because it is a closed ecosystem, then the threat points are at least able to control by one company. So blast door is something which they added to iMessage, but that also security experts have said that because they can't understand how Apple's inner workings itself work, it's difficult to do the analysis. Venu already pointed out 34 out of 37 phones at least examined were iPhones. Android phones, it's a fractured market. It's much more fragmented. Different kind of companies do it. Operating systems are also tweaked. A Huawei phone or from a Samsung phone is going to look very different, although the operating system is different. So the brief answer is no, it is not easy to guarantee anything that you can always be protected. I think it's a very complicated way, but there are enough of protections available and certain kind of preventive behavior you can indulge in. In India, at the Software Freedom Law Center, that is why it conducts for journalists, for activists, for regular users, based on who the audience is, digital security trainings, mostly to tell this is the way you can protect yourself. You can reach out to the Software Freedom Law Center, and it's not pretending to make you feel bad that you don't understand technology, which is a mode when many of the technical people operate in. It is hand-holding, like my 70-year-old father who says, don't do tuck, 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 tell me one by one what exactly I have to do. So those trainings are conducted exactly without making you feel bad if there's no stupid question. So I will say more protection. Second, I think we should not forget the role of private companies and the capitalism, surveillance capitalism, which is sold to us as it's only advertising. So perhaps there's no problem there. We must see what the role of that plays out and how all of these various applications that we use talks about enables this to some extent. Sometimes when they're end-to-end encrypted, they are on our side of privacy. The other sides, we have to see where and how we are dancing. The first question you asked about the 500 companies that I mentioned, I think there's been a call by the ex-UN Special Rapporteur on Free Speech and Expression, also some European Commission officials, about that governments all over the world should implement a moratorium on the sale and transfer of spyware technology until a global export regime can identify. The problem with export control has been that a lot of these Western democracies allow the manufacture of technology. I'm a US lawyer, so I understand if a technology company comes to me and say it is encrypted stuff, I know that there is dual usage. So I can go the Bureau of Industry Standards and ask them what kind of license would be allowed or not. But it is dual usage, so it can be used for these purposes also. That's why, because globally we haven't seen it, and democracies like the US, UK, or Israel try to say, oh, we can protect our own citizens and subject our own surveillance to rule of law, but it's fine to manufacture it to somebody else. That's why we are watching the UAE's involvement, etc. So that's why they've asked for that there should be a moratorium until there's a global export regime. It's like the tax system. If you can say, I will impose tax, but there is a Cyprus and Gibraltar, you can't really hand. And during this pause, they are saying that the governments should negotiate a regime that, amongst other things, can carefully define the technologies at issue. And they're asking for transparent human rights assessments involving a public registry of tools. So if there is a public registry, these are all the tools that are used, etc. Because the idea again is the questions which Venu was answering, it's evasion. Let's just deny everything. Or let's say, shroud it in all these great words, which is when words mean nothing. Oh, India has a well-established procedure through which lawful interception happens. This is not lawful. And what were you doing inside the phone of a leader of the opposition, or your own ministers for that matter? That is why they're asking for that public commentary must happen in terms of these tools. And European Union has taken a modest step towards regulating this, but it has to A, happen at the global level, but B, at the national level also, it has to be targeting all the organs of the government. And one thing should not be used as an excuse to say, oh, the matter is sub judice. Oh, I can't talk about it. And like Tista, you were mentioning that private members bill by Manish Tiwari is 2011. After that, what happened? And there is news, everybody talks about it, and then we go about doing other businesses because there are just so many issues in our country. So there is right now, there will be an end, but it's going to be a constant struggle, and it's not ending anytime soon.
Mishi, there's one more small question, which has got the recognition that Pegasus is just one tool which we are kind of confronted with just now and shocked by. But if you look at the closer look at the dark web, and we are inundated with spyware, and there's a comment from Hemant which says the real problem is the phones that use a duopoly in the phone OS, which is the real problem. Now, I'm not a technical person, so I'm just reading out the question. Sorry. Yeah.
If I got the name right, Hemant, or if I didn't, I apologize.
Hemant, yeah.
Hemant, yeah. I think he's referring to a very interesting aspect of the duopoly of whether it is Google, which starts as a search engine company and then becomes a data company, offering you all these free services in exchange of conveniences and data. What does that mean? And an Apple, which has now decided to present itself as a values-based company. If you went to New York State or Florida or anywhere else, you will see large billboards where Apple only talks about privacy. And so it has decided that it is going to distinguish, because it sells this expensive jewelry, which is technical instruments, but they're very expensive ones. Only very few people can afford it. And then in a positive way, Google has actually democratized it, that because it is open source, then a lot of other companies can build their devices. But essentially, it is correct that these are the two kind of companies which we are seeing. We are seeing the Chinese companies who are now developing their own operating systems. so that they can wean off from the dependence on Android, which is run by Google. But yes, decentralization in this market is going to be very hard, but that does make at least some kind of an argument about in what direction are we going. We have built internet and technology not to serve us, but mostly to say that there is always going to be this exchange where we must pay with our data, we must pay with our values and civil liberties and privacy if we want these things. So that's why even this thing, every time we go examine deep and go deeper into it and examine it as a granular, at a granular level, we must also zoom out and see what have we actually made our lives. Is technology serving us and making our lives better? Or we will just buy the thing about what Silicon Valley wants to tell us, that everything tech does is for the better of the world, move fast, break things. And all of you people who talk about civil liberties or rights, etc., are just Luddites. So I think it's a larger question, but the duopoly of the companies is an important point. And unfortunately, the fragmentation is right now not at the scale that we can say that there are enough good alternatives.
So well put, so well put. Thanks so much. There's a comment, not a question, which I just want to share with everybody because I think it's a good comment, that while demand for accountability needs all power, there is a need to support those creating independent, open source, auditable communication systems. In case we are sharing comments. Yes, we are. So we just shared a very good comment. And I think all of us here would definitely agree, or most of us here would agree. Mihir, there's a question for you. Can the privacy judgment be used in this Pegasus case?
Well, yes, but how will you use it? That's, I'm sure people who are victims right now, including Venu, must be thinking of, I'm sure they don't want to discuss the legal strategies here in the on a Zoom call, but victims must be thinking of ways of dealing with it. The problem with the Information Technology Act, one of the problems is that you can sue the person who is actually infecting your phone or infecting your computer, etc., etc. But the first problem is identifying who is doing it. That becomes a which is not the same thing which we are facing, for instance, in the Bhima Koregaon case, where our argument is very simple, irrespective of who infected my computer. Okay, as long as it's planted evidence, that evidence has to be discarded, which is a different kind of an argument from trying to prosecute somebody or trying to get damages from somebody who actually against whom you want to, you're going to court against somebody and saying that. Of course, I'm sure there'll be. I mean, you heard today itself that Justice Lokur has been appointed as the West Bengal government has appointed him to chair an inquiry commission. Now, whether that will go any distance, one doesn't know, because there is a 78 judgment of the Supreme Court in Grover Commission, where the Supreme Court has basically said that the center can inquire into state, but state can't inquire into foreign center, that kind of thing. So one doesn't know how far that will go.
But the thing is, law and order is a state subject, and Prashant Kishore and Abhishek Banerjee are also victims.
No, correct.
Correct.
But to what? But whether they will be able to summon central officers, all those issues are still open. So yes, I'm sure this is if from a lawyer's point of view, this whole issue is a gold mine, in the sense you can file 10 different kinds of cases for this. To what end, we'll have to see, because that's something because there can be public interest litigations demanding accountability, asking the government to disclose who is, are you a purchaser, are you not a purchaser? It begins from that onwards. So yes, there are multiple options open legally, but let us see how it goes. I'm sure a lot of strategies are being planned out.
There's also a point of information I'd like to share here with everybody, is that John Brittas, who's a Communist Party of India Marxist, CPM member of Parliament, Rajya Sabha, and also a journalist. He's also an Indian journalist who's the managing director of the Kairali channel. He has filed a petition, Article 32 petition in the Supreme Court day before yesterday, on this whole issue, which I think today it was reported on today. So, and in that apart, he also mentions the entire California suit and what has been said and defended by what has been alleged by WhatsApp, etc., and all of that. So that's very much the grounds of that petition. I was just sharing that. And a group of women and men have written to the Chief Justice of India. A lot of signatures have been collected. I think over 500 have been collected so far. Also asking the Supreme Court to take suo moto action. So we don't know where all of this is going to go. This is a question, I don't know who should answer it. Apar, Venu. It's shocking the lax manner in which the GOI, Government of India, has responded to the Pegasus scam. What will it take for the government to be prodded and to be accountable?
Tista, I'll just take a few moments in terms of, so I think all the panelists, Mr. Venu, Desai, Mishi have all indicated that this is a evolving story. Facts are still being examined. There are remedies at several levels. And if you see, there's also a parallel in which people are quite often drawing factual similarities to the Watergate scandal, right? But the Watergate scandal became the Watergate scandal in a series of investigations, which were from 1972 to 1974. It took 2 years. There were investigations concurrently at certain points in time being done by the Department of Justice, the Council of Representatives, which is in the Senate, so the legislative branch, the executive branch, but also a case in the United States Supreme Court. So I think, given the breadth of the scandal, the only way to fasten accountability, given the consistent denials and a clear incentive by the government to avoid any accountability in this respect, is for reporting to be supported by the wire as well as this international collaborative, for victims to be supported by all of us in civil society, and for commissions of inquiries, for cases, and for different forms of public pressure to be put. This also speaks towards how institutions themselves have been weakened and targeted by Pegasus, but also a larger comment. So if Bhupesh Singh Baghel wants to institute an inquiry in Chhattisgarh, or if West Bengal wants to institute a commission of inquiry in West Bengal, I think it's all within their power. One should not take away from the other. At the same point in time, people should have their day in court and get remedy under that. Because even before, for the immediate accountability, for the admission by the government on affidavit in court will be a great advance. At the same point in time, victims need remedy as well. So, for instance, the actual people who've been targeted by Pegasus, they need a certain degree of apology. And finally, I think there's certain aspects which we have looked towards in terms of larger institutional reform, which includes statutory bounds, which define a legal limit of activity for intelligence agencies, never been done. Secondly, in terms of legislative oversight then over them, in which they report to parliamentary committees. And third, when orders are issued for prior judicial scrutiny, as any democratic country would. So I think there are actions required on multiple levels today. And I think one should not take away from the other. I think that will be our best chance in terms of any kind of response to this.
Thanks,
in terms of any kind of remedy.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, not Venu. There's a particular question. You mentioned press council. You mentioned press club and other organizations that might be taking this up in some form or the other. So the question is about Editors Guild and Press Council of India. We also know that the Bombay Union of Journalists has issued a statement. You said, but the question is: have Editors Guild of India and Press Council of India taken up this matter? Venu. Are you there, Venu?
He's on mute.
Venu, I think,
okay. Yeah. So as I said, we 2 days ago, Press Club had organized a kind of meeting of journalists in which the Editors Guild, the senior, I think Secretary General was there, and Women's Press Club representatives were also there. So a resolution was passed that we expect the government to set up a independent inquiry into this whole affair, and if and if the government does not do it, we will explore other legal constitutional options. So subsequent to that, Tisa, you're right, Britas has gone to the Supreme Court, but there is also some discussion going on among opposition parties to come together and file a petition, and the journalists groups, institutions can also file their own petition, so they all can come together. That option is also being discussed, although nothing is concretized. And of course, Siddharth Luthra, senior lawyer, I was with him on a panel, and he said that individuals can go to the police. Since the government is saying that we have not done it, so it follows, according to Siddharth Luthra, that if it has happened, it is illegal. Therefore, right? So therefore, the individuals can go and file a police case and ask for investigation, etc. But that would be, we all know, would be very complicated. I don't know how much can we trust the Delhi police, given their recent record, to pursue these cases seriously. So so there are all kinds of complications. But this is the one larger point I want to make. Just one larger point, which is there is a serious need for, as Apar said, and earlier Mihir Desai also said, serious pressure needs to be brought on the government by the opposition, civil society, everybody, media, that I think we cannot have now bureaucrats sitting and deciding, the fate of, if it is a media law, whether what content is good or bad. Some INB secretary has given himself emergency powers to take down content without even informing the publisher, and some 5 joint secretaries are sitting and deciding whether some content is kosher or not. This is all nonsense. Independent judicial oversight, like it happens in other democracies. I think it's time we shed our, we get these bureaucrats out of this, this whole exercise.
It's a very good point you make, that I think this whole thing about giving these current emergency powers to bureaucrats, and though it sounds an extraneous issue, but it's something my organization has been working on. I want to mention that the NPR rules, National Population Register rules of 2003, which are not in the Act of Citizenship Act, also give power to a taluka level officer to declare a person a non-citizen. A non-citizen. Yeah. So I mean, it's just, it's unbelievable. It's just unbelievable.
In fact, I want to make, I want to tell you something it may sound hilarious. This government is not decentralizing power to the people in other ways.
No.
In every other way, it's centralization. But use of Pegasus, they are decentralizing. States are also allowed to buy. We are told that some Chhattisgarh and other BJP government, tomorrow they'll allow panchayats also to buy Pegasus. So what should not be decentralized are being decentralized.
Mihir, there's one more question which I think you would be best placed possibly to reply, which is the phones already tested by the Canadian lab in this case should or will stand up in the Indian courts. There's a question being asked. Will the test reports of this Canadian lab stand up in Indian courts? Given your experience with Arsenal in the Bhima Koregaon case, I think it's important that you give us an answer, or try and give us.
You see, any like for instance, Arsenal report. Okay, you have an FSL report of Indian laboratory.
Yeah,
is done by the prosecution, which says X. Now, it's an expert opinion. Okay, it's an expert opinion, and an expert opinion can always be countered by an expert. Okay, so if suppose tomorrow a handwriting expert's opinion is there, which the prosecution relies on, you can always rely on a counter handwriting expert's opinion as an expert, or a medical opinion, or whatever it is. So similarly, these in terms of the court of law, these become expert opinions.
Okay.
And they will have to stand the scrutiny of cross-examination, etc., in order for them to be completely accepted by the courts. But prima facie, I don't see any reason why they should not be. Just coming back, just one more thing I wanted to mention, that from what Venu was saying, in the PUCL case where the telephone tapping was challenged, it was argued that you should have a judicial oversight. And that time the court, of course, rejected that argument and said, no, there is no need for judicial oversight. The bureaucrats are good enough, that kind of a thing. So, of course, even that needs to be brought up for reconsideration, that whole PUCL case. because I mean, they are 25 years down the line and things have changed drastically since then.
Yeah, thanks, Mir. Actually, since we're talking about the fascinating, the PUCL case, and of course, the Puttaswamy judgment of 2018, 17 and 18, 17 particularly, I just wanted to point out here that the Subbarao dissenting judgment, the Subbarao's dissenting judgment in the Kharak Singh case, which was like 54 years before Puttaswamy, actually brought up this whole question of privacy being a human right, not just a fundamental right. And it was a 6-member judgment, but he's the only judge to they just struck down a very small part of the Punjab police to continue to have an authority for all levels of harassment and surveillance.
Only domiciliary visits.
Yeah. But Justice Subbarao actually upheld that. Yeah. There's another question about artificial intelligence. So I think, Mishi, I'll take it to you. That is it possible to develop artificial intelligence programs that can test phones for such spyware? Do we have such expertise in India?
I think artificial intelligence is just one part of how a variety of tools are developed. It's just one part of it. You can't just say, okay, is there an artificial tool for that? Forensics is a much more elaborate way of carrying out what the outcome is expected here. And so to say that it won't be used would be wrong. These days, we are trying to automate a variety of parts of what we do in any kind of a technological program. If the question is that, can we reduce down the costs of carrying out these kind of forensic analysis? Because the extent is now becoming, as we come to know about it, and as more and more citizens get worried about whether their devices are being treated in such a way and have turned into spy devices. Yes, there will be, of course, a much more technological development in that sector. There will be costs which will be reduced, but that's for the tech companies and the forensic labs to do. What happens in the larger game is like, are we all like where one we say, oh, let's get the next 3 billion online. India has 925 feature phone users. Let's get the rest of the 400 million online. So have we chilled them all? And we are going to say that in terms of how citizens defend themselves, this is one part of it. I'm not sure. I think I'm more interested in concentrating our energies and resources in saying, stop turning my technology completely against me and getting systemic changes there. Having said that, I already started by saying there are preventive measures we must take. We must not rely on technology in the way we are relying on right now without questioning. I also say it's very young. It's only 2007 the iPhone first came. I think in 15 years of time, it has definitely, or at least smartphones have now invaded our lives that we tend to expect more. But technology is always 2 steps ahead of law, or 2 steps ahead of regulation, and law is 2 steps behind even regulation. So right now, what we are watching from Government of India, which is coming, whether it is the Twitter public theater between minister or IT rules, or these revelations, or the lack of judicial or parliamentary oversight, and just saying that data protection bill will solve every problem of ours, I think it's just trying to fool everybody. Overall, there is no real clarity about where is the role of an individual and where you can make it easy. Even for a criminal matter, the process is the punishment here. Every time we can't tell people, as a lawyer, I can't tell people, go to law and go to let the judiciary take care of everything. We have to, I think, make our own rights and enforcement of that simpler, easier, time-bound, and get rid of all this criminal punishment for business people, have damages there, and also see everything in view of the fact that government is there to serve the citizens. It's not the other way around.
Thanks, Mishi. I think because you mentioned the global protocols that are being pushed, particularly by the former Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression, I think maybe you should be the one to take this question. In case, Apar, you want to add something to add, please. Is that how will those very governments who use spyware issue a moratorium on spyware? And that's a big question for India. I mean, that's the eternal question all human rights activists have about all global protocols. But anyway.
I think that is why when David Kay is asking for a global moratorium, is trying to create a global pressure out there. I think we have seen various fora. We just saw G7, where India had to sign an open society statement and also talk about internet shutdowns. So it might be cleverly crafted, but at least there was some kind of a pressure. That's why they're calling for a global moratorium, to call out this the pretense which the Western democracies indulge in, that they talk a good game about democratic values and other such stuff, and they continue to let their companies run amok and export whatever will not be allowed inside. I think we also need to harden our societal defense against such attacks. It's about legislating and regulating the behavior collection by platform companies, telecom companies, and getting laws in our own country. The constitutional principle is that the government, our government, is responsible for protecting us against spying on the people, wholesale or retail, by the outsiders, and must subject its own domestic surveillance to rule of law. But if there is no real rule of law, it is made into a punishable process, and it is only relegated to some executive officers without any oversight, then we are all living in this pretense thing of going through motions and war and peace and all of that kind of. So I will say that, yes, the question is perfectly right about the fact, how will you get them to do it? That is why international pressure of all kind of organizations, platforms, everybody has to come together and pressurize them, because otherwise they're rightly pointing out it will never be done.
Apar maybe, and then also Mishi might need to come in. I wonder if the use of Linux on computers becomes a safer option, because it is not economically viable to develop tools, spyware for an operating system that is used by such a very, very small number of people.
Tista, what we were talking about is targeted surveillance specifically. So quite often what's happening is that targeted surveillance is impacting people beyond certain operating systems, which may be predominantly used. Secondly, smartphones by themselves do not have ready-made commercial, at least in terms of that facility and convenience, Linux-based system, as much as there are derivations of it. So the Android and the iPhone do become the predominant choices for people. So while Linux may be preferred by people by itself, for instance, if there is a root access which is granted to another person, which means essentially the other person starts controlling that device on the basis of spoofing an email, etc., gains access to that system, it can be done. Essentially, cybersecurity is important through technical measures, but as most people, and I'm only speaking as a person who's recipient of cybersecurity training, but not a trainer myself, only as a person who's a recipient of cybersecurity training, it's essentially making it tougher for your adversary to gain access to your computer devices and systems. Not a complete insurance by itself, but only increasing the difficulty. Ultimately, all safes can be broken, but you're making it more expensive for the other party to do it.
Please, I'll just say
Mishi,
one more thing.
Please, Mishi.
It would be good if you could speak about this.
Mishi, come.
So Android open source project runs the Linux kernel. So it is based on that. I mean, the idea here is that if the kernel is there, that doesn't mean what is built on the top of it, everything is as transparent. The idea of free and open source software is all bugs are shallow if there are too many eyes. If you show everything, then at least it is possible for researchers and everybody else to come and look what are the problems here. Now, but the Android open source project is then taken by many companies. What Huawei builds on that is very different than from what Samsung builds on that. And to the point earlier made, this is true. Our threat analysis looks very different. I think the government of India is not going to be able to afford to have Pegasus for a variety of us. For 1.25 billion people, if they think the numbers matter, and it is driving the costs up for sure. Having said that, I will say that free and open source software is the default which we should be pushing for. For transparency and accountability, so that we can see what goes on in terms of what is being offered to us, and not by the open washing of any of the statements. I think that happened with Arogya Setu also. Last year, when Arogya Setu was going to help solve all the world's problems and to stop this pandemic, that time we forced the government of India to show us the code, because we see where the data was being collected, what was being done. I think that's the default to say that we need free and open source software. The Linux kernel, yes, on your computers, on your machines, do you encrypt your entire hard drive or you don't encrypt hard drive? And again, I'll draw a distinction between the operating system which works on our laptops and machines and mobile operating system.
Yeah.
There is a very different threat analysis, the number of applications you download from app stores, which app does what. It's a very different threat analysis from what I, as a Debian machine runner or an Ubuntu machine runner, faces.
Thanks, Mishi. That was very important. Now, to add to that, when you mentioned this thing about having every code out in the open, so that people can look at it, just to make another connection, because I think making connections are important when we are looking at what our governments are doing, is in this whole EVM debate, in this whole electronic voting machine debate as well. The whole demand has been for some people that whether you believe they can be hacked or not, why is the code which is being used in these machines not being made public so that people can look at it and test it, And I think this is one of the, we need to also make some of these linkages and connections when we build up a public campaign around what's happened so invasively with the whole Pegasus affair. I think let's end with this $1 million question and we'll go to Mihir. What are the chances of the Indian Supreme Court taking up the Pegasus case suo motu?
Suo motu, I don't know, but taking it up, if you had asked me, I think 2.5 months back, I would have said 0. Today, I would say reasonable chances of the Supreme Court taking it up. So, I mean, that's suo motu. I don't know whether they'll take it up, because anyway, petitions are already filed. So there is no reason for them to take it up suo motu. They can take it up in one of the petitions if they want to take it up. So they can always do that. I'm sure it will be difficult if there are a large number of petitions filed by serious entities. It will be difficult for Supreme Court to just brush it aside, like they brushed aside the political bonds issue or Kashmir.
Rafale
or whatever it is, I think that's going to be difficult for Supreme Court to do. In what direction and how much it goes into, we'll have to wait and watch.
Venu, one more question has come in and I think it has to go to you. How much does it cost to use Pegasus on one target in India?
Tista, I've only seen, rates being mentioned in newspapers. I think Siddharth, my co-founder, was telling me that that $50,000 or $60,000 per is the rate that Pegasus charges. Besides, they initially charge a fixed fee for the service, and then they charge whatever $50,000-$60,000 per for every sort of phone tapped or whatever, for every Pegasus use of Pegasus malware. Now, going by that, Tisa, it's very expensive. So, at the current cost, I don't think the government can tap, some 900 million phone users. I mean, I'm just theoretically saying it'll go bankrupt if they pay for so many. So I think therefore they'll pay for a limited numbers, which of course, and those are the people that the party, the BJP would want to keep, since the lines between the government and the parties got blurred here. So all those who oppose this government, so those numbers would be small. So I think it is affordable, but we need to know. That's also part of the transparency. We need to know how this payment was made, because it's a commercial operation. That company takes money by check. Now I am told that if one carefully goes through the Controller General of Accounts, one can find some little entry somewhere, some payment for some software, because post I think 2017.
I was also wondering about CAG.
No, actually, Mr. Subramaniam Swamy has already tweeted the 4 CAG reports. And I said there's a huge 100 or 150 crore jump in the last year.
Yeah. So
It doesn't say who it went to.
No, that's true, but then you have to look for that. You have to look for that closely.
Who it went to.
So it can, maybe it could be an entry saying that important software bought for.
That's right.
Bought for Home Ministry or NTR. So it must be that. So,
but there was a huge jump. But there was a huge jump.
Yeah. So it's overall, I think it's an expensive affair. It's not cheap to do it on a very large scale.
So I think we are kind of coming close to 9 o'clock. We're almost there, and I think I just like to, on behalf of the Network of Women in Media, the Free Speech Collective, and Sabrang India and our team, really thank all the wonderful speakers and the participants in this panel discussion, and some absolutely super questions that came in. And we are just hoping that will be the first of a series of discussions like this, because I think people are very concerned, are really very, very concerned about the implications of what this might mean in terms of, in terms of course, security, in terms of surveillance, in terms of data protection, but I think also in terms of what it means for Indian democracy and the institutions of Indian democracy. Whether it's the freedom of the media, whether it's an election commission, the Supreme Court, because we know the kind of intimidation that is possible, the vengeful kind of vengeful state actions. I mean, enforcement directorate people are on it, CBI officials are on it. So we know the implications of all of this for anybody who's even half sensible. So I think the more we can have such discussions, and I'd also like to urge that we should have these discussions in Marathi, Hindi, and the non-English languages, because I was talking to some journalists who are in the regional languages, and they're very worried because they don't even have the quote-unquote visibility and protection of the English-speaking media. And they're really, really worried as to what this means even as a profession of journalism. So I think this is just the first, hopefully, of many such attempts collectively made to see how we can build up a citizens' campaign, a public campaign among different sections of people against this kind of very pervasive surveillance, which actually means that the whole nature of the Indian state is changing in front of our eyes. It's already changed, or it's in the process of changing, and there's no transparency, no accountability, and like has been said repeatedly, no judicial kind of checks and balances, which are absolutely necessary for something, even if you're using it in very limited context of terrorism or whatever crimes that you think deserve such surveillance. So there are many, many action points that we need to kind of pull out of this. And I'm sure a lot of people will start thinking on those lines. And I think it's also to convince ordinary citizens that, like Venu said, fear is something that's holding people back, because people have seen what this regime is. I don't even call it a government. I think it's a regime, that what this regime is capable of. So I think to be able to surmount that fear, one way to do it is to do it through collectives, through collective action, and maybe multiple collective actions, just like Mihir was saying, and Apar was saying, and Venu was saying, Mishi was saying, that it doesn't have to be just one way you do it. You can do it in multiple ways, not just through the courts, but through discussions, through public pressure, global, national, and others. So thank you very, very much, everybody. It's been a very short time to plan this, but I think it's worked very well. And we just hope that some of the issues raised by all our wonderful speakers will help to take this public campaign forward. Thank you so much.